As discussed in my previous video titled Specialization is Overpowered, specialists are all but guaranteed to have a 100% proficiency in all categories, allowing them to develop a Hatsu and skill set free from any categorical constraints. The only things an individual specialist is limited by are their own talent, imaginativeness, tactical acumen, work ethic, and of course, the general limitations regarding Nen that transcend categorical boundaries. This makes specialization the objectively most flexible, efficient, and potent category among the 6. Now, this newest revelation has made waves throughout the community, at least in the very little corner of it that is my channel. While some are quite satisfied with this novel development, or perhaps more accurately clarification of specialization's mechanics, others are not particularly thrilled. Both of these opinions come in various degrees and are prompted by different reasons and arguments. While specialization working in this novel manner is consistent with the vast majority of feats displayed and statements made throughout the series, there are also a few standouts this revelation doesn't necessarily jive well with. In this video, I aim to discuss one, in my eyes, rather jarring inconsistency which I really can't think of a way to reconcile with Togashi-sensei's previously established world building, while the other honestly isn't really much of an inconsistency or even a real issue at all for anyone else but me, most likely. Think of it as my own little alternate canon or fanon, which I believe would have fit perfectly with this newest revelation about specialization. As established, if we take everything the fake Morena Prudo said as gospel, specialization is the objectively best category by every metric imaginable. As such, one would have expected an entity created to stand atop all other living beings as the ultimate biological creature to be a user of the objectively best category. I am of course referring to none other than the king of the Chimera Ants, Meruem. Meruem was actually stated to be a specialist in an old databook, but was then re-established by Togashi to be an emitter as a part of his art exhibition from a few years back. I won't say retconned, since the canonicity of any databook is always dubious at best. On the other hand, the information we were given as part of the aforementioned exhibition is not only the most recent and up-to-date info, but was also supposed to have come directly from the man himself. With that said, prior to Morena's revelation about specialization, Meruem being an emitter made perfect sense. Aura transference, which was pre-Rose Meruem's baseline Hatsu, is an emission-based effect. This plus the awe-inspiring range and destructive power post-Rose Meruem showcased after synthesizing Yuppie's Rage Blast again made him seem like he had reached the absolute unattainable pinnacle of emission. Now, you might have noticed the rather specific phrasing of pre-Rose Meruem's baseline Hatsu. This is because, as with a lot of Chimera Ants, it's difficult to gauge where their Hatsu begins and their alien Chimera Ant morphology ends. Thanks to Pito directly stating so, we at least do know that Meruem's aura acquisition or aura synthesis is definitely, at least partially, a Hatsu. Whether or not it was facilitated by his innate Chimera Ant morphology is difficult to tell. This is especially considering what happened after his encounter with humanity's infinite potential for malice and or evolution, when the fatally injured Ant King absorbed the essences, Hatsu, and innate abilities of both Poof and Yuppie. To what degree this was possible solely because of theirs and Meruem's Chimera Ant morphology, and to what degree it was facilitated, or at least empowered, by Meruem's own aura absorption abilities, is ambiguous. Whatever the case may be, Meruem not only absorbed the aura of his 2 royal guards, but also synthesized their abilities in the process. Whether this means his Hatsu evolved from permanently acquiring the aura of those he consumed, to him in his post-Rose form now being capable of synthesizing entire Hatsu, or whether this was a freak one-time occurrence, is again left ambiguous. He never used the ability again, so we can't know for certain either way. Now, while this reimagining of Meruem's categorization made perfect sense, and I stood for it at the time, the question as to why he wasn't a specialist becomes really jarring in retrospect to Morena's revelation. Without rehashing the whole of the aforementioned video, specialization's current specs entail that any NEN user that doesn't exclusively focus on their innate category is objectively better off being a specialist. After absorbing Poof and Yuppie, Meruem had showcased transmutation and emission when he fired off Yuppie's Rage Blast. Manipulation through Poof's spiritual message and enhancement is a general must for any combat-oriented individual. Okay, maybe not for post-Rose Meruem while in the known world, but it would still be good to have a 100% efficiency in it should he ever come across other Chimera Ant Kings or any other similar entities. As a NEN user with an assigned category, no matter how, very ironically, special Meruem was, he was still bound by the categorical limitations of emission, i.e. a standard proficiency distribution. And the king being bound and limited in a way one of his direct subordinates, namely Pito, is not, is strange at best and incongruous at worst. As in, even if he wasn't born a specialist, which he really should have been, it really feels like he should have undergone a natural NEN type shift to become one following his revival. While we have no idea what a natural NEN type shift even entails, let alone what's natural for Chimera Ants, if it was ever to occur, it should have following his resurrection and ascension. This is especially if his ability had evolved to synthesize Hatsu and not just absorb aura, since while no longer exclusive to specialization, the capacity to acquire and then use the abilities of others seems to be a very strong indicator of it. With all that said, all other arguments be damned, apart from one where the ultimate life form, essentially genetically engineered for world domination, isn't a user of the equally objectively supreme NEN category, while one of his direct subordinates is. Speaking of a natural NEN type shift, let's now discuss my little headcanony grievance. As you could probably tell from the title and or thumbnail, neither are decided on as of me recording this, I firmly believe that Isaac Netero should have been a specialist instead of a pure enhancer. Specifically, I believe he should have undergone a natural NEN type shift following his insane training and attainment of the 100 type Guanyin Bodhisattva. Now, while a natural NEN type shift is something that was established ever since Izunavi explained NEN to Kurapika in a flashback during the York New arc, we've yet to see this phenomenon actually occur in the series proper. We don't know what's required for someone to actually undergo this process, and the only character we have who may be undergoing a natural NEN type shift and moving towards becoming a specialist seems to, very ironically, be the guy that's least likely to move in general, namely Miluki Zoldyck, who's been designated by Togashi as a specialization midpoint manipulator in the aforementioned exhibition. The only other character designated as a specialization midpointer is none other than our boy Kurapika, but we know that's due to his Kurta lineage and the gift/curse that is Emperor time, allowing him to become a pseudo-specialist while particularly nettled. As I'm sure you're aware, this isn't a natural NEN type shift, since while in E.T., Pika isn't a true specialist, but a nerfed pseudo-specialist still very much limited in most ways by his Conjurer's proficiency distribution. But that's a topic for another video. To get back on track, since we literally know nothing about what this fine specimen of an A-board moderator has been doing that allowed him to undergo this process, we really can't use him as reference for deducing anything of import about natural type shifting. Even my assumption that his diagram placement is indicative of him undergoing a natural shift is purely speculative, since his placement could also be somehow tied to an ability, artifact, or or even Aluka/Nanika. We know he's abused their power to get himself a computer before, which was not authorized by Silva, but him wishing for some kind of power or other boost so he can continue to sit on his butt while conducting assassinations remotely in some unorthodox fashion, while unlikely, wouldn't be beyond the pale for the Zoldycks. Not by a long shot. Since we know next to nothing about this phenomenon apart from its existence, this leaves the room wide open for wanton speculation, which I will very much oblige. A small tidbit of info we were given when Izunami first introduced specialization to Pika is that conjurers and manipulators are the ones most likely to undergo this shift and become specialists during their lifetimes. We can glean from that statement the following three relevant things. 1. While conjurers and manipulators are most likely to undergo this already rare shift, it's not impossible for the users of other categories to as well, just even more unlikely. 2. There seems something peculiar about these two categories which makes their users particularly susceptible to undergoing this change. The most obvious reasoning is that their placement within the diagram as specialization's immediate neighbors inherently makes their users more susceptible to undergo the transition. However, it was Izunavi's explicit claim that specialization's placement is somewhat arbitrary, and that it was placed between conjuration and manipulation simply because their users are most likely to shift to specialization later on in life, making it seem like specialization's placement between them and opposite enhancement is mostly arbitrary, and that it theoretically could have been placed anywhere within the diagram. This, of course, makes no sense, since specialization's placement nonetheless affects the proficiency distribution of the other categories, acting as a particularly egregious black hole of proficiency for its two neighbors. Togashi's never gone out of his way to address this glaring inconsistency, but that's neither here nor there. Let's at least assume there is a good reason, outside of their placement, why the users of manipulation and conjuration are most likely to undergo a categorical shift. 3. The implication of Izunavi's explanation, which the aforementioned exhibition essentially confirmed, is that specialization is the only category a NEN user can naturally shift to. This implies the existence of a universal rule, method, or principle which allows for and facilitates this shift. As such, we can deduce that whatever this rule, method, or principle may be, conjurers and manipulators would, in general, be the most likely to inherently employ it and inadvertently make themselves susceptible to undergoing the shift. Now, as I've mentioned in previous videos, the users of manipulation and conjuration are the ones most likely to meaningfully tap into and utilize other categories to create their Hatsu. This, while not a universal rule, is definitely a general tendency of manipulators and conjurers, and I fully suspect this to be the main driving force behind their higher than average propensity for undergoing categorical shifting. In other words, I believe that those NEN users whose Hatsu are particularly complex, necessitating as many as 3 or even 4 different categories to make them possible, but who nonetheless manage to achieve an exemplary level of mastery and proficiency with them, would be prime candidates for undergoing a category shift to become specialists. However, this process may very well require not only the aforementioned multi-categorical dependency of a user's Hatsu, paired with an exemplary degree of talent and dedication of course, but also outside and or inside pressure, such as consistently finding themselves in particularly perilous situations, or pushing themselves to undergo training regimens most people would consider utterly insane. Should all these factors be present at once, a NEN user would push past their boundaries and transcend their categorical limitations. Or, in other words, they'd become a specialist who would innately no longer be bound by any categorical limitations. This would not only give them an outright boost to the level, force, and accuracy of their abilities, every facet of which would be functioning at 100% efficiency, regardless of what category was used, but would also greatly lessen the load on their NEN memory, since those effects that require the investment of a certain number of skill points to make a certain effect possible would now be lessened by 20, 40 or even as much as 60%. This would then allow the user to redistribute the now newly available skill points by adding additional effects to their abilities, or serve to lessen the severity of their conditions and pledges while maintaining the same effects. Yes, specialization really is just that damned good. This was a very long-winded argument, I know, but that's kind of the bread and butter of this stupid channel. An enhancer whose ultimate and life-defining Hatsu required the use of 3 or even 4 different categories, depending on whether the Bodhisattva itself was conjured or emitted, really makes it feel like the post-training arc Netero, transcending the limitations of his potential, should have been mechanically represented as and been a consequence of him transcending his categorical limitations to undergo a natural Nen-type shift from a Master Enhancer to Enlightened Specialist. Since this isn't the case, I really can't even fathom what is required for someone to undergo this process. Whatever Miluki is doing is the key, we just need to find out what the hell it is. If you've got any ideas, I'm all ears. Also, I know some of you are quite fond of the idea of Netero being an enhancer, and that's fine. Togashi-sensei obviously agrees. I just feel like Isaac Netero would have been the perfect showcase and exemplar of just how powerful, rare, and demanding this shift could be for a non-conjurer or non-manipulator to undergo. As always, thank you very much for watching, your feedback is always appreciated. Subscribe if you'd like more content like this. I'd like to very much thank Kamaswami and Matt B for going the extra mile in supporting the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.